I am here today with a book review, and as you can see, the title is Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. The subtitle is How to Heal from Distant, Rejecting, or Self-Involved Parents. The first thing I want to talk about is the title of the book itself. It might bring up a strong reaction in you when you read the title. Maybe it immediately repels you, or maybe it triggers some emotions within you. For me, it was intrigue. I was very curious about this book when I first saw the title, and I knew right away that I wanted to read it. But beneath the intrigue and the curiosity, this title also stirred up something else within me, and that was guilt. So these conflicting emotions, this intrigue and this curiosity, wanting to dive into my childhood to understand more about myself, was intermingled with this guilt. Am I being a bad daughter? Am I betraying my family for reading this book? And I'm going to talk about all of that in this video. Before I get into the meat of this review, I want to say that this review is very personal to me. So what I say may or may not resonate with you depending on the childhood that you had and the experiences that you've had. I read this book because a lot of stuff has come up for me recently regarding my relationship with my father. I was an only child raised by a single parent, my father, until I was about 13 years old when he remarried. So the first 13 years of my life was with my father, and while he provided a very stable home in terms of shelter, food, clothing, all of the necessities of life, the physical necessities to raise a child, he was also a very stoic and hardworking father. He was very dedicated to his career, and as a result, we didn't spend a lot of quality time together, even though we lived together. We definitely didn't have deep and meaningful conversations, and there was really no emotional connection between us. It was very much a stoic father and his very introverted daughter. And while I know he did the best that he could, and I'm very grateful to him for raising me, even though he didn't intend for me to grow up in emotional isolation, that's essentially what happened. And that has resulted in me really struggling to navigate through relationships in my adult life. I only started digging into this a few years ago, so there's still a lot to work through. And I will say that this book is probably one of the best books I've ever read. It helped me work through a lot of things that I continue to work through. This book starts by talking about what it's like to grow up with an emotionally immature parent. It talks about that being a lonely experience, but in the sense of emotional loneliness. So even though there is someone physically present, there is no deeper connection between the two people. The lack of emotional intimacy causes a general feeling of emptiness, which is something that I have said in the past, where I had all the things that I wanted. I had enough money, I had a good job, I had family and friends, but there was still a sense that something was missing. I felt a bit empty inside. If you can relate to that feeling, then I highly recommend this book, regardless of whether or not you think you have emotionally immature parents. I think this book is really beneficial to just understanding relationships in general, regardless of whether you're seeking to understand a parental relationship. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit and talk about some of the traits that the author identifies as being associated with emotional immaturity. So an emotionally immature person is rigid and single-minded. They don't really allow for nuanced situations. They see everything in black or white. They also have a low tolerance for stress. If something surprises them or if something doesn't go their way, they get stressed out very easily. They have little respect for differences, meaning that they don't really tolerate differing opinions and thoughts very well. They want everyone to agree with them and be the same as them. They're also egocentric, so everything kind of revolves around them. They will always bring things back to themselves, even if you're trying to share something about your own life. They are self-referential, not self-reflective. So this means that they think very highly of themselves, but they don't ever pause to think about how do my actions or behaviors or words affect the people around me? The last one I'll mention is that they have low empathy and are emotionally insensitive. This means they don't understand what other people are feeling. Those are just a few of the personality traits associated with emotional immaturity. The book contains more, but I just listed off a few that really resonated with me. The author goes on to identify a few emotional limitations that arise due to lack of emotional development when people are young. So this is really interesting to me because being raised by an emotionally immature parent for the majority of my life, I developed a lot of these traits. And it was only through a lot of self-reflection and a lot of inner work that I'm starting to become more emotionally mature. But I think I had a lot of these emotionally immature characteristics when I was young, especially when I was in my 20s and even into my 30s. So I do understand where emotionally immature parents or emotionally immature people, why they are the way they are. But I bring this up because I want to make it clear that it is possible to change. But you have to be willing to change, and self-reflection is a big part of that. If an emotionally immature person is not willing to self-reflect, then they will never change. All right, so some of the emotional limitations that emotionally immature people have, and that I also once had: a fear of feelings, a fear of feeling angry, a fear of feeling scared, vulnerable. These are all human emotions, but I had a real fear of them because I didn't know how to process them. I didn't know how to handle them. Emotionally immature people can also be killjoys. I don't think this was a hallmark of my personality before because I'm generally very excited about stuff, excited about happy news and good news, but a lot of emotionally immature people will poo-poo on good news. They'll either change the subject to something that's more interesting to them or more centered on them, or they'll dole out warnings so that people don't get their hopes up. Emotionally immature people have very intense but shallow emotions. So for example, when I used to get angry, I would react very superficially. So I wouldn't process my emotion, I wouldn't think about it, I would just react. So I would maybe snap at someone, or maybe I would slam a door in anger or something like that. It was like a child having a temper tantrum. Whereas now when I'm angry, I still feel the emotion. That is a very strong emotion for me, but I don't express it in that way anymore. I know that my anger, when expressed, has an effect on the people around me, and I don't necessarily want that. I want to be able to process my anger on my own and then talk about things when I've calmed down. So processing my anger means feeling the anger, not suppressing it, not numbing it. It also means maybe I need to take a break. I need to step away from the computer. I need to go for a walk, or maybe I write morning pages. Morning pages is tremendously helpful to me. I do them every day still. It's been almost 5 years of morning pages daily. And that really helps me to process all of these quote unquote negative emotions that I feel. But I try to figure out a way to honor that anger. Why am I getting angry and what can I do about it? What boundary can I set, or what conversation can I have? Because it is coming from somewhere. And even though I know I am going to feel angry in the future, I don't want to be angry about the same things all the time. The last emotional limitation that I'll mention is that emotionally immature people don't experience mixed emotions. So what I talked about earlier about the title of the book, me feeling very intrigued and very curious about it, very drawn to it, but at the same time also repelled by it because I felt a sense of guilt for wanting to read the book. These are conflicting emotions that emotionally immature people have a hard time feeling, holding both simultaneously. It's usually one or the other. Other conflicting emotions could be joy and sadness felt simultaneously, but I also want to mention here that there is a range of emotional maturity to emotional immaturity. And we can all be emotionally immature if we are in a stressful or tense situation. I think the key here is self-reflection. If you're reflecting on your experience, your emotions, and you're making an effort to understand more about the way you're feeling, I think that is a sign that you are more emotionally mature than someone who doesn't self-reflect, who doesn't really consider how they might be affecting the people around them. The book identifies 4 types of emotionally immature parents. There are emotional parents, driven parents, passive parents, and rejecting parents. Due to the length of this video, I'm not going to get into all of them here, but my dad was definitely more of a rejecting parent in terms of our relationship when it was just the 2 of us. He was very hands-off in his parenting style, and he didn't welcome any sort of emotional exchange between the 2 of us. A lot of the examples in this book deal with emotionally immature parents who are a lot more hands-on in their children's lives. So for example, a parent who needs to be in constant contact with their child, who asks for a lot of help, who is very demanding, who always wants to see their child and spend time with their child, and will react in a very negative way if the child tries to put up any boundaries. So it's hard for me to relate to some of the examples in this book, but I still found this book incredibly helpful. This book talks a lot about emotionally immature parents and how that affects a child. One of the things a child does to cope is to develop a healing fantasy or a role self. The role self is essentially a mask that you put on to please your parent, to try to get some sort of emotional connection with them. So for me, I really put on a mask that I was strong and independent, I could take care of myself, when really there was a part of me that needed the emotional intimacy. But I didn't reveal that because my father would not have been pleased if I had shown that type of neediness. A healing fantasy is thinking that one day things will change. One day I am going to have that beautiful relationship with my father. Once I have done enough inner work, once I have become a fully healed human, my dad and I are going to have that deep emotional connection that I've always wanted. So of course this is a fantasy because this will never happen. It takes 2 people to have an emotional connection. One is not enough. I cannot force my father to be vulnerable with me, to have a deep, meaningful conversation with me. That is not the way a relationship works. So this book also talks about how to awaken from this healing fantasy. And one of the ways is to drop your role self, that mask you are wearing, and finally express your true self. If you've been following my channel for a while, you know that this is a big thing for me. It's something that I've worked on for many years. I even wrote an entire book on this called Authenblissity Reset, and I'm going through the reset myself. I call the true self my inner compass, and that is something that I intuitively knew that I had to return to because I had completely lost my sense of self. So this was incredibly validating to read, and expressing your true self just means expressing your true desires, expressing your boundaries, expressing what you truly feel inside rather than what you think the person wants to hear or who you think the person wants you to be. This can be very difficult, especially if you've been in a role self for so many years and there's a part of you who is a people pleaser. It can be really difficult to express your true self, but little by little, the more you do it, the easier it gets. And there's also a positive feedback loop because you start to become really proud of yourself and more confident as a result. And that helps you express yourself even more, not in an aggressive or in a mean way, but just in a very confident and matter-of-fact way. The book ends with some very practical strategies on how you can relate to the emotionally immature people in your life. The one strategy that I really like to use is detached observation. conversation. So rather than getting emotionally enmeshed with the person, trying to get the person to feel or react in a certain way, to have a deeper emotional connection, I step back and I observe as almost a third party. I observe our interaction. And when I do this, I notice that the relationship or the conversation is very one-sided. It's not reciprocal. And I also notice qualities that are emotionally immature, sometimes from me in the way I'm reacting to the person, or sometimes from the parent. It's a really interesting way to help gain some perspective. And the more data I get as a detached observer, the more I see that I am justified in letting go of this healing fantasy of ever having a deep emotional connection with my father. It's just not going to happen. So I have let that go. Instead, I just focus on each interaction being civil, being respectful, but also not losing who I am in the process. There are more practical strategies and tips in the book, but these are the things that really resonated with me. I highly recommend reading this book and seeing what resonates. And once again, even if you don't think you have an emotionally immature parent, this book is amazing for just relating to people in general and also increasing your own emotional maturity. I loved this book so much that I bought this book, which is Recovering from Emotionally Immature Parents. The subtitle is Practical Tools to Establish Your Boundaries and Reclaim Your Emotional Autonomy. I'm partway through this book. So far, it has been quite repetitive, but I've had so many aha moments, and I think repetition really helps with this type of topic when you're trying to tune into your inner compass, especially when there is so much noise that could potentially steer you off course. That is going to be it for this review. Let me know down below if you've read this book or any of the other books by Lindsay C. Gibson. I've also flipped through a couple of other books in this series, so I will leave the links to all of those down below, but these two are my favorites. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'll be back very soon with another one. Until then, please take care and bye for now.